Hi, everybody. My name is Luke Bajarski, Research Director here at Skift Research. We're bringing to you live from Skift, New York, our episode 3 of our Skift Research Analyst Sessions podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the state of destination marketing in 2017 as a follow-up from our most recent research report, the State of Destination Marketing 2017. So we have the team here, myself, we have Jared Ween, our senior analyst based out of New York.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We have Margot Big, who's our contributing analyst and principal author of the Destination Marketing Report. Margot's actually dialing in from Tenerife, Spain. How you doing, Margot?
I'm doing well, thanks. Hi.
Hey, thanks for calling in. And we also have Dan Peltier here, who is our tourism reporter and also recently came back from the WTTC event in Bangkok. So thanks for joining us, Dan.
Happy to be here. Thanks, guys.
Great. So today we're going to be talking about a lot of different themes and topics about what's happening with destination marketing organizations in general. We'll be focusing on kind of the big questions, looking at funding and the spend outlook for DMOs. We'll be talking about how these organizations are shifting their spend from different channels, going from digital and offline, and maybe even back from online to offline, talking about effective content strategies, and then talking more generally in the space of this kind of increasingly noisy digital landscape that destination marketing organizations or tourism bureaus are operating in these days, and the overall relevance of what they do and how this entire landscape might shape out in the future. So let's just kick it off and talk a little bit about where the ad dollars are coming from or where they're going. So as part of the report, we did a big Skift audience survey targeting digital marketers, and we got a total of over 300 responses from DMOs all over the world, state level, city level, country level, bureaus that answered over 30 questions about how they're spending their ad dollars, the types of channels that they're focusing on, the types of content that they're publishing, to get a better sense of the landscape. And one thing that we found is that, and maybe this is to be expected, but the bigger the entity that these DMOs are marketing, the more they tend to spend on advertising. So cities overall had, look at cities. We saw that 40% of tourism bureaus at the city level spent less than $1 million annually on advertising, and about 20% spent between 1 to 3 million. Once you get into at the state level, you're seeing an increase in that spend where you have close to 60% spending anywhere between $3 to $20 million on advertising. So it's really across the board, and one of the things that, is a big topic these days is where that money is coming from. There's a lot of shifts going on. And I know, Margot, you had some good interviews, discussions with people for the report. What do you think are some of the challenges in fundraising for some of these organizations these days?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. I mean, primarily the fact that a lot of DMOs are completely government funded. So they're relying on governments, state governments, city governments, local municipalities, while at the same time, a lot of states are seeing big budget cuts. And there have also been really big concerns about how the money is being spent. I think there's a rapper in Florida, I can't remember his name, who made the news because he was given something like a $1 million retainer to help promote tourism in Florida. And caused a pretty big scandal in a state that already has some interesting political things going on. So I think those are really the big challenges right now is how states are getting funded, how cities are getting funded, and public partnerships seem to be the way forward, at least for some states and some tourism boards, just because they really sort of put the direction back into the hands of the people who are actually directly involved with tourism, and allow a little bit more autonomy. So I think that's something we're really going to be seeing in the future in terms of funding.
Interesting. So politics tied to the funding. Dan, what do you think? Is that and that rapper, by the way, was Pitbull, right? Who caused that big scandal in Florida.
Indeed, that was Pitbull. He is no longer the spokesman for sexy beaches in Florida, unfortunately. But I think it's important to remember with the Visit Florida case, and actually, I think it was the Florida legislature, they decided earlier this week or late last week that Visit Florida would be getting, I think, around $25 million for funding for the next fiscal year, which was dramatically lower than the $100 million that the Florida governor and Visit Florida itself was calling for. So that hasn't been signed into law or enacted yet officially, but that's kind of the situation that they're facing. But I think it's important to remember that a situation like Visit Florida, even though it's very high profile because of what's happened with Pitbull, that DMOs facing funding cuts and having to go through these hula hoops to justify why they exist isn't anything new. It's been going on for decades. And that has a lot to do with politicians mostly just not understanding why you need to market a destination, especially a place like Florida, which the argument is that people are going to visit Florida anyways, right? Like, it's a beautiful, sunshiny state, Disney World, beaches. It has a lot going for it. What's the need to put millions of dollars behind that to get more people to visit? And then the argument is that it's so much more than that in a DMO. It's not just telling people, come to our hotels, our beaches.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really good point. We always, one thing we always look at are kind of the historical trends. And now that we're kind of in a more upward kind of trajectory when it comes to the economy, a lot of what ended up happening in, during the financial crisis where public budgets were being slashed, at the economic development level, I imagine at the tourism level. It's interesting to see that these kind of funding issues are still kind of rearing their heads right now when we're in this very, I'd say, relatively favorable economic environment. And we asked the audience for our survey to look at some of those, just to gauge general sense in terms of optimism. And we saw that for the most part, people were either very optimistic or just generally optimistic. About just over the majority, close to 60%, were in that category. But we still had this rather large chunk of DMOs that were less than optimistic, more in the kind of the 60% range, and some close to 20% said they were not very optimistic. So, there's still a lot of back and forth. And I think a lot of that really depends on, destination, clearly on the type of organization we're dealing with. But, in the bigger context of tourism and travel, Jared, these numbers, it's 60%, 40% of these bureaus are spending less than $1 million on advertising alone. How does that compare to what's happening in the segment space? You're thinking about how much hotels are spending, and maybe put a little bit of that into context for us.
Yeah, sure. At the higher end, you have the online travel agencies where you have a Priceline spending, maybe $4 billion or so, and Expedia spending similar amounts, and then you have the large hotel chains that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars. So, in terms of the big picture in the advertising landscape, each DMO by itself is very small. Obviously, if you add them all up, they start, the share, could be comparable to, a couple of the big hotels. But individually, it's very subscale. And I think that's probably why they have challenge monitoring, true ROI on some of these campaigns. How much is attributed to them versus a hotel campaign, and what's the true economic impact? There's a lot of smart people that work at DMOs are just, when they look at the resources that they have versus a Marriott, and then at the higher scale, what a Booking.com has, like obviously you're not going to have the same power to work on Google, to work on Facebook, to use analytics.
Yeah, so I mean, when it comes to digital strategy, that's really, that's I feel like that's really a crux, of the question here is when we ask, what the fundamental purpose is of destination marketing groups these days, when we're working in this digital environment where all the hotel groups in a destination are spending all this money to promote themselves, but in the process, promoting the destination itself. And I know, Dan, you talked a little bit about the kind of the connection between tourism and economic development as a way to kind of fill in some of those holes. And I know that Margot, you talked about, you had a very good interview with the folks over at the Tourism Oregon group. But maybe Dan first, if you could give us a sense of, what you're seeing in terms of this connection between, tourism bureaus and how they're connecting through economic development as a way to kind of justify funding, or, what's going on there?
Sure. So I know that a lot of that has to do with, tourism boards saying that we're not just in the business to, obviously, first and foremost, we want people to visit our state or our city or our country, but we also want to improve the quality of life for residents in the city. So kind of taking tourism and tourism dollars and making that work and reinvesting that in the destination. So that could come in the form of urban development, new housing, affordable housing, a lot of, there's, I guess, a growing trend, I guess you could call it, is what's called like a tourism improvement district. So kind of sectioning off a part of a city, or, usually at a city level.
Big in California, right?
Very big in California, where you're identifying an area that you particularly want to grow tourism in. And this is really where that economic development comes in. So that also includes, bringing more restaurants and attractions, but also, restaurants not only benefits tourists, it's also really good for locals. And we've seen time and again when new restaurants open or anything like that, especially food is such a hook for everybody to visit a new neighborhood or move to a new neighborhood. So it's really about, making these cities more livable, but that's not easy to do. And you also want to bring all these tourists in. And
yeah, it's really interesting. So we have this, scenario where destination marketing groups are not only competing with other states, other cities, other countries for traffic, but they're also competing with the hotels and the online travel agencies when it comes to digital traffic. But nevertheless, we're seeing that destination marketing groups continue to spend an increasingly larger share of their marketing dollars on digital advertising. In our digital destination survey results, we saw that close to 70% said that digital was going to take up a larger share of their budget in 2017. Perhaps more interestingly is the number of respondents that said that digital would take a smaller share, and that was in the low single digits, and where close to a little under a third said that it would pretty much remain the same. I think that's a really big question, is how you can compete, in this landscape, this huge expanding digital universe, and, really make a big impact for your destination. What we also see, though, is that when it comes to, digital as a share of total advertising budget, there is quite a big spread in terms of what destination groups are doing. So if this figure here, we see that, kind of the biggest quartile of destination groups that are spending between the biggest quartile of DMOs are spending between 20 to 50% of their marketing dollars on digital. So that's, but really it's really across the board. You have some that are spending, 8%, 32%. So the share of DMOs spending 0% of their dollars on digital is, less than 1%, let's say. But when we look at the other end of the spectrum, we see that there are destinations that are going 100% digital. I, personally, it really depends on the destination here, but it definitely is a trend, and some of the technology platform providers that we talk to are pointing to groups that are going 100% digital. I think that's really, really interesting. About 9% of our respondents said that they're spending between 80% and 100% of their marketing dollars on digital. I think Visit Philly is an interesting example, or at least one example of how targeted marketing can ultimately impact how you're spending your dollars. A lot of the traffic that Philly gets in terms of visitorship is ultimately coming from the New York area, right? So that's kind of an interesting example where, how do you channel your marketing dollars when it comes to kind of the point of sale markets?
Right. No, that's a challenge that every destination is facing. And I think what's interesting with Philly as an example is that they have a separate body or organization for convention sales and meetings, and a separate body that's really primarily focusing on consumer travel marketing and leisure travel. And again, every destination approaches that differently. Sometimes it's all wrapped up into one.
Right.
There's really no one size fits all.
That's actually something interesting that Travel Portland mentioned, sort of the CVB versus DMO distinction, and the fact that I think it was actually Travel Tempe, who, the fact that a lot of destinations are expected to kind of justify their existence based on how many, conventions are held there, or justify their existence on actual visitor numbers rather than really how they sort of enrich local communities, as we were talking about earlier, and how there's not really a clear-cut way to justify how they exist. And I think with some of the things like Adara and Arrivalist and Insight and Sojourn, they'll actually be able to use data to really sort of look at how, justify their dollars in a way that they haven't been able to before. Because before it was just, okay, we have X number of conferences being held in, Arizona or whatever this year. This means that we should have N number of government dollars. So I think that the technology will actually really, really help DMOs justify themselves in a way that they haven't been able to before. And those that don't, or who aren't willing to invest in this kind of technology, are probably going to face some real trouble in the future.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Justifying spend, whether it's business or leisure, ultimately a lot of that is connected to tracking visitors, but also attribution when it comes to return on ad spend, looking at what, where people are coming from and whether or not you can attribute what you pump out there, at the digital level, and see what kind of impact that is having on visitors coming to your area. And there are different platforms that are working on solutions for that. Arrivalist and Adara are two of those. The type of data that they're using is a little bit different. Adara is using more of the booking data, looking at connecting with the GDSs, looking at who's booking, and then connecting marketing campaigns to users that were caught in their pixels to essentially track that spend. But there's always that issue of correlation, causation, right? Did the person already intend to go to Philadelphia and just happen to click on search for Philadelphia flights and saw the ad, and was that ad really responsible for changing that consumer's behavior in a world of infinite travel opportunities or possibilities these days when it comes to destinations? I think it's always a big question that a lot of the tech providers are battling with these days.
Yeah, definitely. I know I was just looking at one of the names on this chart, Sojourn. I had a conversation with them a few months ago, and they were saying that one of the biggest problems is that a lot of DMOs don't understand where someone is coming from before they visit their site, or even where they're going, most importantly after their site. So DMOs are saying, like, we have a big role to play in how trips get booked, why trips get booked. But if you don't know where travelers are going after, they visit your site and they see all of your great content, that makes it really hard to say, well, visit Philly or visit California, for example. Like, we factored this percentage or this much into a decision. But it is happening more and more. It's just still so new. Again, funding plays into how that's possible.
Yeah, exactly. And companies like Arrivalist, they're taking a little bit of a different approach when it comes to the type of data that they're tracking. They're looking more at device arrivals, right? So if you see the ad on your smartphone, the Visit Philly ad on your smartphone, for example, and then you somehow appear in Philadelphia a couple weeks down the road, Arrivalist will be able to attribute that as a return on ad spend, or a attribution for that ad spend. But going back to your point, Margot, about how DMOs are using this type of data, from the people that we talk to, there's really a big difference in thinking from the board members that are sitting on a lot of these deciding budget for DMOs, and ultimately the data that's available to DMOs, right? Just in terms of the, board members being really much more data-driven marketers and hoteliers that are used to looking at data points to justify ad spend, where, the destination marketers have less of an option when it comes to data to kind of justify their budgets, and saying, hey, the board, here's the data. So a lot of the stuff that's going on with these groups like Adara, Arrivalist, they're really trying to arm these decision makers at the DMO level with data that they can use to come back with to their boards and their funding partners to say, hey, look, we are actually making an impact here, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think, again, it's the question that you find with whenever there is any sort of public involvement in things, is that generally politicians, whether it's a scientific policymaking or anything else, politicians don't necessarily know how things work on the ground. And so, Visit Quebec, for example, or Quebec Tourism have created a public-private partnership that I think is really going to, lead the way in a lot of ways, because they have industry stakeholders. People are investing in these new public-private partnerships and are seeing the payout. They know the industry. They know how things work. They know about really how things work on the ground, rather than just knowing how to sort of keep voters happy. I mean, it's just a huge difference. And I think that that's really becoming necessary, again, with the current political climate and budget cuts across the board. And I think it'll benefit DMOs at the end. It might be, or, it'll benefit destinations at the end. It'll benefit hotels. It will benefit really everybody within the travel industry. And they still are working, in the way a nonprofit might, that they still get a lot of government funding. So it's not like they're just going to lose their funding and it's going to become an entirely private situation. So I hope it will become a best of both worlds scenario in the years to come.
Right. And that's kind of, looking at funding and justifying funding. But in terms of ad effectiveness, Jared, I know that Facebook has done quite a bit of work in targeting users, Facebook members across the internet. What's your take on, how destinations might be able to use dynamic ads on Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's a great technology. It's complicated to optimize. So I guess just backing up dynamic ads for travel, it's basically if someone has Facebook open in the background on their app, on their website, you don't have to log in, but it saves kind of your history, and you can basically a DMO.
Yep,
let's
sure.
re-edit. So
Sure.
let's ask the question again.
Okay. So when it comes to targeting customers, the DMOs are using data to justify spend, but when it comes to targeting actual travelers, I know that Facebook is doing some unique things around their dynamic ads product, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, dynamic ads it's a really interesting technology because if someone is booking a flight, you can target them with hotels, and you could slice and dice the population where, they know that Luke was looking for a flight to the Skiff Forum in London, and then a hotel can now say, okay, I'm going to try to sell you specifically, Luke Bajarski, a hotel at a given rate. So the conversion on that type of thing would be higher than a typical kind of non-Google driven ad. And obviously the difference with Google is there's intent, there's commercial intent. So you're searching for something, where here it's kind of a pull versus a push. But for the DMO, I think it definitely, in terms of the branding, I think it should be a very effective platform where if someone has been interested in going to Florida and they've been kind of searching for that, and you start showing them these great, beautiful beaches or things they can do, it builds the awareness. I think the challenge is, then it's not like it's a hotel or an airline where they're going to immediately book a link, through the DMO.
Yeah.
So to track how effective that ad was in getting the person to come, I think it's a huge challenge for the DMO by itself. But I'd imagine these technology providers, they keep improving the platforms and, being able to track across devices. And I know that's been a big push. And I think the next step from our conversations with these guys and also the OTAs and the hotels is to be able to track across time. So if you were shown an ad, but then you don't do anything until a week or two later, right now, there's really no ROI attribution to doing that. But over time, I think that'll be something that improves. And obviously, I'm not like a technology expert where I would know how that works, but given that Facebook is doing this, and you have all these really smart, deep funded companies that want this to succeed, I would suspect that the time issue will become less and less of a barrier.
And I always thought that the way that Facebook can track you from the cross different devices is really compelling too, right? Just going from mobile to desktop back to mobile, in a perfect world, right?
Right, and that's the thing where because Facebook, most people use an app, and the app is pretty much always logged in if you have it, and if you're searching for travel on your phone, and that site partners with Facebook in some way, which doesn't mean that you're logged into Facebook to book a trip on Kayak, but if there's some sort of like button or some sort of pixel, they'll know what your kind of activity or search activity, if you will. And then at the same time, when you go to your desktop, typically most people, when they go to desktop, they don't really use Facebook that much, but if they do, the password is saved.
True.
So you get the same kind of cross device because you're logged in on both.
Right. Okay, so we talked about spend attribution, return on ad spend, talking about tracking visitors, but let's talk a little bit about content now, and customizing content. One of the questions that we asked in the survey was, whether or not destinations are personalizing their content depending on who comes to their website. And here we're talking about the Visitors Bureau website. And just over 50%, just over half said that they do actually customize their content. That's a pretty, I think it's a pretty big share. 40% said, well, they were not. There's a certain portion of the respondents that really didn't know, but I think there's a lot to be done there, right, in terms of A/B testing and how that can impact campaign effectiveness. Target market campaigns. Again, we said the Philly was a good example, and kind of channeling all of their ad efforts, or a big portion of their ad efforts, to the New York market, for example. So there's a lot going on in the digital space there.
And Hawaii also did something really, really interesting with Expedia, where they have this sort of video thing that you can go in and you watch a video. It detects your face, and then it actually looks at the way that you emotionally react via facial expressions whilst watching a video of Hawaii. So they'll show you different scenes of Hawaii, and then depending on what you see and how you react, they'll assign you a spirit animal sort of thing, and it'll be sort of like your traditional Hawaiian animal that will then be your traveler profile, essentially. So they'll be able to really know what kind of traveler you are, what sort of things interest you, and what things make you happy. So I think it's a really cool way of sort of taking typical, testing type heat map sort of style testing to the next level, using the technology that's available, and then being able to customize content to an extent. I mean, there's still only 3 different profiles, but wow. It definitely shows the way forward, I think. So I hope that more companies continue to use the technology that we do have to really make things.
That's really interesting. Custom. And is that on the Visit Hawaii website, or how does that?
I believe so. I'm not sure if they host it on the Expedia website or if it's on Visit Hawaii. I think it's on Visit Hawaii though. But yeah, you just basically watch the video and it assigns you your animal. So from there, they can then customize content. And I think in general customization, I mean, across the board in the travel industry and really in all industries, all the studies show that that's what the millennial age group really wants. And that's where the bulk of spend is going to be in the future. So I think that people who can sort of look at ways to both find out the data, to get people to declare data, and to actually really use it to customize and create individual experiences that people will want to share on social channels, are going to stay far ahead of the game.
Right. That's really interesting. Like the type of content that destinations are putting out. Greg over at Travel Portland said that most DMOs are kind of telling the same story, right? Trumpeting their beer scene, talking about the food scene, their neighborhoods, so what can, a lot of these destinations do differently, I guess, is the question these days, right? I don't know, Dan, if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that really is the challenge. Like, how do you make yourself stand out? Especially, every city now is claiming that they have craft beer and wineries and everything like that. It's really becoming, ubiquitous everywhere.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one thing that Greg also said from the interview, and Margo, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but he kind of looking at just not losing the, kind of the gritty appeal of what makes a destination, right? Not to kind of put too many filters on, the actual essence of what a place actually is, to make it more genuine. If it's just beer and food and kind of cheesy, archetypical millennials giving, cheers to whatever at a bar, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important and especially with a place like Portland, which is sort of rife with cliches anyway. It's important to really look at what sets places apart. And just as you were saying, craft beer and wine, everybody has craft beer and wine, and everybody has boutique food, whatever. So what are some of the experiences that you can't have anywhere else that, and really, really focus on those, because so many can be copied and mass produced. And I think that most people aren't really looking for that sort of Disneyfication of their travel experiences, and especially as personalization becomes more important. So
yeah, definitely. And, one thing that we asked about during the survey was this concept of loyalty and how loyalty applies at the destination level, right? Obviously, the hotels and airlines are going after repeat customers over and over again. But what about at the destination level? And we've done some work in the past around this topic. And we asked what I thought was really interesting in the survey. And this kind of goes back to, content and how can you do things differently? If those people that have been to Portland already know what's happening on the food scene, what kind of content can you deliver to kind of make them want to come back again? Are some of the questions that organizations are talking about when it comes to loyalty and destination and really courting repeat visitors or loyal visitors or people that have been there in the past. And interestingly enough, close to 40% of the DMOs that we surveyed said that they were working on some form of loyalty strategy for their destination. Very small amount, though, on the other hand, actually had a strategy in place, just over 10%. So I think that this is definitely going to be a rising trend in the destination marketing world, where you see a lot more destinations focusing on, okay, yeah, how do we keep our guests coming back? In an increasingly competitive world, it's really going to be, going to boil down to custom content, new forms of content, and really giving people a unique perspective on places that they've already visited.
Mm-hmm. And I think definitely festivals and seasons are the two sort of big things. If you can really, there might be places, maybe people would go to Aspen or something for snow sports and go in the winter, but why? I always ask the question, why would I want to go off season? What are some of the things that could make me, really appreciate this place during its non-typical season? And then, big events, especially if they can get involved with local events and really actually sort of, put their money behind local events that both highlight what local people are doing, really put a focus on the local culture and the local vibe. I think those are the kind of things that are going to really attract people, so a destination marketing organization that ties up with a music festival or that focuses on off-season travel, and that will help them keep visitors coming year-round, especially in places that are highly seasonal. So,
very good point. Very good point.
Yeah, I think you're seeing that more and more now, that destinations are not just saying, we're only here for the summer, and then pack up and then we're closed for business. Like, they're doing all sorts of things, in the off season, whether it's, take New York City, for example. The winter months are some of the best months to visit in terms of prices. Hotel rates drop. There's restaurant week, there's Broadway week. We're getting into the summer travel season very early now, but you also have things like the Tribeca Film Festival, which is coming, and other cities have film festivals more in the off season to kind of bring people in. So it is becoming more and more rare to just see a destination totally shut down, and they really can't afford to in the off season.
And again, that goes back to the types of content that you're delivering, right? The digital, in the biggest sense of it, digital versus offline. Some might argue that offline could be, more effective at times, just given all the noise that's out there in the digital world these days to really drive a connection. But then again, how do you customize that offline content, not only to the individual, but by season and, different events? from the survey, we saw that, that's the one key question that we asked in terms of return on advertising spend. Which one is more effective? Is it digital advertising or offline? And the majority said that, well, it was kind of an even split, actually. Digital advertising, a little under 60% said that digital was more effective, while actually hardly anybody said that offline advertising was more effective than digital, in the low single digits. What was interesting is that, close to 40% said that both were equally important. So there's definitely this idea that digital is definitely the future, offline advertising, not so much, but then a lot of people said that both were very, very important. So that's kind of the landscape there.
Well, digital you can track. I mean, that's the thing, is that a lot of people, a lot of DMOs until recently were just holding focus groups or putting out surveys that they wouldn't have answers for a year later, whereas digital, you can track it right away. And I mean, again, it goes back to justifying it and really being able to look at the data and being able to create data-driven strategies that you really cannot create to the same level when you're just asking focus groups what they think about television ads, or having people fill out surveys saying what magazine they saw a tourism board's advertisement in. So I think it's just necessary at this point that they shift their focus to digital more and more.
Right. Yep. And, there's a lot of far-flung stuff coming out these days with like virtual and augmented reality. A big, actually, I was very surprised to hear that 24% or close to a quarter of the DMOs that we surveyed said that they were, implementing virtual or augmented reality as part of their marketing campaigns. We looked at overall ROI, on some of these investments across virtual reality compared to Facebook, compared to influencer marketing and, other kind of visual formats like Instagram and video. Maybe not surprisingly, the virtual stuff, more people found that much more, ROI harder to measure compared to some of these more established platforms.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I know I was talking with Visit Lex over at Lexington, Kentucky, about this virtual reality, not dilemma, but challenge, an opportunity that they're facing. So they kind of see that right now more as an opportunity to promote their meetings and their convention business. They've been kind of bringing their VR headsets with new VR videos that they just rolled out last month on a road show, and at different, trade conferences around the country, showing, meeting planners, like, here's, a video of of an experience that you can have in Lexington, Kentucky. Here's like a little taste of it. And maybe you still want to visit, maybe you don't, but this is kind of one of the first hooks. They said they're also making a video of their convention center that shows basically what they were saying is all you need to know in, a minute or less to help you make a decision. So right now on the consumer side, it's really hard to measure, and it's, I guess, less common for DMOs to say, we're totally all in this, for the consumers versus business traveler. But I think a lot of DMOs who have tried VR are noticing that they can more easily justify an ROI on, the meetings and the business traveler side avenue for right now.
Gotcha.
And that'll probably change as the technology becomes more available, more affordable over time.
So part of that split between leisure and business then is like really just kind of just being able to, again, track the ROI on a lot of this spend, right?
Right. I mean, it's, if you're having a one-on-one conversation with a meeting planner who's bringing a lot of business in, I mean, that's, I guess, easier to track and keep tabs on.
Great. Well, we've definitely come a long way. The destination marketing space continues to evolve. We've gone from offline to online to new forms of content to custom content to tracking content. So we'll definitely be paying attention to the space and how it's shaping up. And we'll be running the survey again in 2018 to see how things are changing once again. But we're all out of time here today. So I just wanted to thank the group here and our listeners for joining in.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.